Hello, theory students. This is just a video description of your TBL personal justification. Of course, you all know what this is, and you've heard some description of it, but in case there are more questions, I wanted to take you through the actual assignment again and address each one of these questions. And I'm also going to show you the model just briefly and give you kind of a sense of how to use these models because, just because we call it a model doesn't mean it's ideal, and it doesn't mean that's the only way to do this, or the best for that matter, right? So your task here with the TBL personal justification was always to give a kind of an analysis of how output, interaction, and motivation are used or planned in your TBL lesson. But of course, they have never been, it's never been the case that the lesson was always completed by the time you did this. So historically, we've always said, think about how you will plan. Think about what your plan is. Think it through using these concepts, considering these concepts, and that'll actually help you to do a better lesson. So that was always the case. And with the new final assessment and curriculum, there's kind of, it's still that way, but the final assessment of curriculum pushes that back even further. So, which is why I provided some alternatives. You can still think about what you will do. You can still think about what you have done in terms of your lesson that you're planning now. Or you can consider an outside source, like the examples that I include in your post. So that's the background for this. And once you've decided on your lesson, I think another thing that students are not clear about is it's a good idea to be detailed. Anytime you write academically, anytime you're expressing yourself and your application of concepts in your own personalized way, detail is your friend, right? You don't want to be vague. You don't want to be kind of general. You want to be as specific to your plan as you can. That's just a good rule of thumb for academic writing. So, for example, if I see 3 papers and they're all kind of generally talking about output, and they're all generally talking about interaction, and they're all generally talking about motivation, and then I see one paper that's like, oh, here's exactly where output is pushed in my TBL plan, or the one that I watched, and here's why that's specifically important in detail. Well, that 4th one is really going to be the impressive one, don't you think? So that's my point about detail. Don't be afraid of detail. Detail is your friend. So jumping in to the description, your justification. Number 1, how does your TBL plan, or the one that you watched, provide opportunities for output, and why is that important? Well, I could show you the model, but the model is kind of general, to be honest. There's some good things in it. I'd rather you didn't copy the model. That's certainly not what it's used for. It's supposed to inspire you of one possible way to look at it. Here's your good example. The most effective way, second language, crash-in. One of the things that's good about this is the use of specific theorists. Why is that important? When you're talking about output, Krashen's not the most important person. I'll just add that here. So there's specific concepts related to output that are listed. Please don't feel like this is exactly what you should include in yours. Use your own interpretation of what you've seen. Use your own specific concepts that you can find. There's one paragraph, the way this was done. The first paragraph gets into a lot of background, and then it switches into kind of English education in Korea, and sort of her own background about her own education. So we're not too picky about structure, but structure is one of the things that I would say is not necessarily ideal here. If I were a student, I would look at this prompt and I would say, well, that sounds like there's one paragraph for justifying the importance of output and one paragraph for my specific task-based lesson. And I think she tries to do that in the first paragraph, but it kind of jumps around from examples, from theories, to the background of Korea, to her own preparation. And so we say it's a good example. It's not perfect. Okay. So I would say think about it that way. Perhaps just one clear paragraph with a good background and some good support about the importance of output, and one clear paragraph about your example, your teaching, or the one that you saw with lots of detail. Okay, so why is it important? You can say a lot there. How was it done in your teaching? You should be able to say a lot there. A lot of specific detail. Remember, I haven't seen your lesson that you're planning. So you want to, particularly if you're describing something that you haven't done yet, you want to use a lot of detail to make it clear. Even if you're describing a video that you watched, like one of the other options I gave you, you want to be clear enough that it's clear that you are specifically talking about a particular moment and you know how that is output. So remember that output is not just one skill, so keep that in mind. If you're talking about one of the output skills, make sure that you mention which one. Hint, hint. Okay. Number 2, how does your TBL lesson provide opportunities for interaction, and why is that important? So we spoke a bit about this in class, of course. Again, when I look at that question, I put one paragraph about the importance of interaction, citing various theorists that you studied in the theory class, and one paragraph about my own lesson or the one that I watched. And here the example is not bad, right? She's got a thing where crashin becomes crassin, so you want to be consistent with things like spelling. What's good about it is that she is mentioning specific theorists, and she's mentioning things like the negotiation of meaning. I think you could say a lot about interaction. I think you could mention people like Long and others who were interested in interaction for different reasons. You have a paragraph here about the TBL lesson. It's quite detailed with a lot of specific dialogue, for example. That's going to make something like this clear to the reader. So that's something you can take away from this. Another thing I'd point out is when you look at some of these examples, and again, some of them are better than others, and please don't feel like you want to copy paste, because that's not going to be good anyway. But when you look at some of these examples, notice how specific the references to concepts and aspects of those specific aspects of those concepts are. So that part is quite specific for most of what she's writing here. And also, when you look at her description of her own teaching or her own planned teaching, that's quite descriptive and quite specific as well. And she's making the effort to make those connections, making the effort to connect specific things from her teaching to specific aspects of the concepts that are relevant here. So that's an important part you don't want to skip, right? So it's not just going to be a paragraph about theory, a paragraph about my teaching, but within the paragraph of your teaching, you're referencing and referencing and referencing, connecting and connecting and connecting. Otherwise, it's like two things that aren't connected. So that would be a big tip for writing this well, is detail and connections. Now, your last part, you have motivation for number 3. And you do know a few different kinds of motivation. You've seen motivation in this class, and you might have picked up on it from your other classes in passing, for example. If you have an idea about motivation that comes from somewhere else, like a specific reference to different motivation theories or something, you're free to use that if you include the source here, because I need to see where what you're referencing is coming from. And it's also good to make sure that you're not just Control-C, Control-V. And that's just basic academic integrity. Whenever you reference something from an outside source, you want to include a link at the very least to make it something that can be tracked down, so the original can be seen. So here in this paragraph, you've got a paragraph about the importance of motivation in her opinion. I think you could do that better because I know Y1 pretty well by now. And it's also specifically talking about a specific kind of motivation. As I was mentioning in class today with the student question, you can't go wrong with being specific, right? Being specific and being clear and being direct and deliberate and linear in your logic, that's very much the English writing genre. That's what we do when we write academic genre in English. And indeed, this kind of discourse, and as well as the way we tend to speak, this leads to this, this is connected to this in this way. Don't leave anything unspoken or unsaid or assumed. Don't rely on the reader's schema, because the English reader wants those connections to be spelled out clearly by the English writer. And that's just the way it is, right? Of course, in Korean, you have different conventions and different expectations of the writer and the speaker, and there's much that goes unsaid because of a shared context. English is very much context reduced, right? So spell it out crystal clear. We call English, by the way, a low context language, so you need to be very explicit in your writing, whereas of course Korean is a very high context language where whether you're writing or speaking, there is much that goes unsaid because we assume that everybody around us knows those things in Korean. Okay, so have a good look at the model, have a good look at the template, but I encourage you to be detailed, to be specific, to make connections, and by all means be yourself and be creative here. This model is not meant to be something that is replicated and redone and redone and redone. It's just supposed to light a fire under you, so to speak. It's supposed to inspire you a bit in this, one of your last assessments. Okay? Well, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the NJ Guan.